So welcome to this fireside chat that we're having at Core Recruitment. Now, if there's one area which has been very evident within businesses for the past 12 months and very challenging for businesses, it's the motivation of employees. But what we've definitely seen within different businesses and organizations is depending on the age group that they're trying to motivate and inspire, the criteria, the credentials, and what actually motivates people at different levels within the organization has changed. So it can no longer be a one size fits all for businesses. You need to tailor your approach to these different groups. But does that cause multiple levels? Does that cause rubbing between the groups? How is that actually done? And what actually motivates people at different levels within these organizations? We've got an interesting panel today, a very international panel today, who are going to be telling us a little bit about what they do within their organizations and from their personal experiences. So thank you all very much for joining me. Now, the first thing, I'm going to come to Stuart first. And Stuart, you can give us a little bit about yourself and your background. But Stuart, from your perspective at retirement villages, can you give us a bit of an understanding of the values and preferences and any of the technology that you're using when you're motivating your teams?
Sure. Thanks, Kristen. I'm Stuart Moore. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Retirement Village Group. Been there about 18 months. Prior to that, I was CEO at CRM Students. So very much operational real estate, operational teams, large teams, diverse teams, varying age groups. And I think that's why you asked me to speak today. And I think really one of the key areas around technology, and this is one of the issues that any hub and spoke businesses have, is to try and keep in contact and keep in communication with the guys on the ground, be it in retirement villages where we've got people who spend most of their time groundskeeping or cleaning rooms or cleaning units or domestic staff. So making that a connected business is very, very challenging, no matter what age that we're talking to. So a large investment is obviously spending money on Microsoft 365 and making people come together. Yammer is something that's very key. We also use Facebook business pages because, again, people are used to technology that they're used to in their social life. So that's how we use technology, is to try and utilize what people use in their day-to-day social, so we're not having to retrain and reuse that. However, in terms of the diversification across the business in terms of their age group, there's obviously quick adopters and slow adopters, and those are where the challenges lie really in the use of technology.
Excellent, Stuart. Thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for being with us. Andrew, I'm going to come on to you with the question of understanding like these different generations and the approaches that you have to have with them. Being based in the Middle East, obviously the approach might be a little bit different. Can you give us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I've worked in the Middle East for 16 years. I've been supporting companies like Pizza Hut and Hilton and some of the big sort of like retail brands in the Middle East, IKEA. Currently, I'm with Etihad and spent a considerable amount of time with Starbucks as well. We've been working in Russia, Turkey, all over the Middle East with that as well. And I spent quite a lot of time in Australia with P&O as well on kind of cruise ships in the Merchant Navy. So I suppose I think the interesting thing is here there's 5 generations at play. That's the first time. So I think for the first time in human history, there's definitely 5 generations. So that's really, really interesting. I think definitely the generations entering into the workplace, the way that they want to learn information from us has changed quite radically. So there's been this real shift. One of the big challenges that we face as an organization, and the organizations I support faces, is really the idea that, traditionally, perhaps, X generation, myself included in that, quite like a traditional, ILT face-to-face workshop. There are some major drawbacks on that. I mean, we've definitely found during the last couple of years, particularly with, events forced upon us, that was a huge change in how people kind of went about their learning. I look at how my daughter and my son typically learn now. They're in their they're millennials or Generation Z, and they have a very different way of learning. I think what's really interesting for me is the way that they're able to sort of like help me with my learning. And so a lot of kind of reverse mentoring, particularly. But they also like this idea of kind of micro learning, so watching how to do something. So In fact, I mean, I've been married for 29 years, and at the weekend we were celebrating, and I was watching my wife how using curlers. And it sounds a bit of a crazy thing to say, but if you think about how even she now, she's currently in sort of mid-50s, and how she's basically learning to curl her hair. She's learning to curl her hair by, literally YouTubing or Googling how to use Babyliss hair curlers. Other hair curlers are available. And she's watching and she's pausing. And I think there's a really interesting point there, because I think there's less of this requirement to actually retain knowledge now. There's more of a requirement to be able to instantly find something and actually use that bit of information almost instantaneously. So I think the way that we kind of catalog information, we kind of present information, we keep it really, really short. And it's crazy. A lot of the data that we kind of know now, most people make up a decision. You probably turned off already, because about 5 seconds after someone starts speaking, they decide whether they want to listen to the entire 1 minute. So that first kind of 5 minutes or first 5 seconds of a conversation is really important. I spoke recently at the House of Lords and the House of Commons in the UK, and they were very interested in this kind of like idea that we could, really sort of like reduce the amount of time into these kind of, I call them gobbets, but probably not appropriate language, but very, very simple micro messages. So if someone wants to improve their active listening, or they want to conduct maybe a performance conversation, or they want to curl their hair with the Babyliss curlers, actually they can quickly, instantly find that information and use that as a kind of a library, as a reference point. So there's kind of always 4 things I really kind of focus on, which is someone wants to learn something. That's very, very powerful. And I think my job isn't really in trying to make them want to do something, because that's a personal decision. My job is very much around making what they want to learn accessible, easily findable, and just very easy to kind of get hold of, on their phones or on the way they want it. So there's a big shift away from this kind of like very traditional classroom workbooks to a much more easy, simple, micro kind of learning approach. So hopefully that gives you some insight into what we're trying to do.
Absolutely, Andrew. That's brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Emmanuel, coming on to you next, and kind of same question in terms of understanding those different generations and what your organization has been doing about that. Specifically, if you can elaborate on any technologies that you've been using specifically help with that, that would be great.
Absolutely. I mean, I have to agree with the previous comments. Today the information is moving very fast, and people decide in the first 30 seconds if they really want to get their information, or maybe just moving away. And for us, being in hospitality, which is a very practical job, we need to move fast as, of course, the operational moving. We apply as Ennismore. We're working on a platform called WorkChat, Workforce, which eventually, is the professional way to have a Facebook where, you see those group of professional, group of hotel interacting with other group of hotel, just to make sure that the information is also fun and people can assimilate the knowledge, update of the company or anything new, launching, new opening, and also chance to, meet colleagues from the same company in a different countries, which honestly brings some very positive result and feedback from any sort of age. You have somebody that, like me as a millennial, where you join a company and you get this big booklet and say, this is your booklet. That's the way you learn. And then, I see now that eventually the moment you join, your onboarding process is through a link that you can go and get all the right information. And again, it's very, very fast, and it's almost very hard to predict what is going to be the next 5 years of information and the way people want to assimilate. But it's challenging in a way, because not all the topic they're very interesting, and today people seems like they have a hard on focus on things that they boring in a way, So everything, especially my industry, on a specific degrees, need to speed up and make sure that the whole learning process change, the whole e-learning approach now on any single department is alive and is interactive and is through video and is through short caption, through short interaction. That's what we see in hospitality.
So, Emmanuel, at Ennismore, when you've been implementing this e-learning system, have you taken a different approach when you've been thinking about what age group it is that would be the end users of that platform, and what have they been?
But not eventually on yet on group age, but yeah, definitely much more tailored by the person. That's the beauty of having a process where you can put information and can generate a learning process based on the figure and the age and the person you are. So that's about it.
So could you give us kind of like a bit of like the differences that would be if there was a Gen Zer who was kind of like doing learning, or a baby boomer, what would be the traits that you would expect to see, and how would you make that technology accessible to all groups?
The very important things to do is make sure that they understand the core value of the company, because that's where the real learning comes, because people get distracted very fast. So if they don't understand the core value of the company, it's going to be hard for us to make sure that they learn and they follow through a specific mandatory training to follow online. So again, the moment you join, and even if you are, as you say, as a boomer, you have a specific training that you need to go through in a way or the other. There is no exception, because we're working for a company that has been established for years here. Is one of the most fast-moving lifestyle company, and it's important that the base is solid for everybody. But then at the same time, the same base allow you to go on the platform and pick the training that you prefer the most. And that's the freedom we give it to people, because you can decide that your tendency, they are much more towards the service, towards the beverage, towards the guest interaction, the selling, the sales, the marketing, content, digital, and also on. So you can customize your learning as you want and as you feel. And that's what the difference between maybe somebody like me, and again, that they've been teaching us that you need to go step by step to reach a specific position. Today, people, they feel like they want to learn a lot of stuff. And today they might be much more towards content, and then tomorrow they're much more creating recipe or creating something different, more people feel that they have freedom to choose what they have to learn, and more is going to be much more interactive and much more approachable for them. Excellent. At any level. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Manuel. Stuart, going to come back on to you. And my question is, like, 1.5 million people took early retirement during the pandemic. And one of the things that we've seen over the past kind of like 2 years since the pandemic is that these individuals are now coming back. They're taking part-time jobs. Some of them are taking full-time jobs again, but maybe not at executive level, maybe kind of like, lower rungs within organizations and businesses, maybe working local, maybe less pressure, less hassle, that kind of side of things. Have you been taking steps to engage these individuals? And if so, how have you been doing that, and has it been successful?
Very, very interesting question, and very apt. We ran a survey with a financial think tank last year, because obviously retirees for Retirement Village are key. And we discovered that retired people contribute unpaid work of 3% of our country's GDP. So that is from childcare to volunteering to everything in between. So we are very, very keen on engaging with our retired audience in volunteering. It doesn't necessarily have to be paid. What we're finding is whenever we're engaging with our audience and our potential audience moving into our homes, it's about providing purpose. And that purpose is really why you said in your question, Christian, is they're not necessarily going into the high, the C-suite jobs. They're not going into the jobs that they were before. They're finding that new purpose. They're being that creative point. They're being something else. They're doing something else because it's driven by purpose. We're also finding that people, as they age, if they are given a purpose, live longer, nearly 8 years longer, if they're driven by purpose. So I think all of that is coming together in a wonderfully perfect storm that we can actually engage that retired audience. And providing we can engage with them on a purposeful, driven level, I think then they want to come back into the workforce. They want to come back into volunteering and really contribute to society in that way.
Absolutely. Great answer. Thank you very much for that, Stuart. Andrew, coming on to you, and my first question for you would be around communication, and specifically authentic communication, because this is something which lots of organizations have struggled with in terms of tone of voice and getting that tone of voice right across the generations. What have you seen in the Middle East, specifically within Etihad?
I think I think first of all, there's a real challenge with authenticity. 100%. So there's kind of five big sort of battlegrounds, I suppose, that we work on. I think there's this piece around independence, and that kind of is driven by people being there's like the psychological safety of being authentic, because that's concerning. Because I think some people we see a lot of masking, and that's actually bad for mental health and wellness as well. So they're not comfortable being themselves. They believe they have to. They're playing a role, which I think is a real challenge. I think there's a huge piece around self-awareness for individuals. I think sometimes people believe they know everything, have all the answers, and almost not knowing everything and not having all the answers is a sign of weakness. So that also drives a piece around kind of authenticity. I think there's this whole piece around trying to connect the dots, definitely for younger, sort of newer generations coming through the workforce. That's a massive thing. I always try to say to people, please, definitely as you embark on your career, try to broaden the breadth of your knowledge. Don't just try and stay in one track. Don't try and stay in one lane. One of the big challenges that I face as an educator is that, often you have people who have stayed in one lane for maybe 15 or 16 years, and then they want to take the final step or the final two steps, and that's completely impossible for them because they don't have a broad enough experience in what they've been doing. They're very specialized in a particular area. So I think that's really, 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 really important. People are quite scared about being authentic. I think I'm sort of jaw-achingly authentic. I think sometimes people get very uncomfortable with how authentic I am, but I think that to me is really, really important. I think people being able to give me very straight, direct feedback, people being incredibly honest is really important. I've had a couple of interesting bosses in my career. I've had lots of interesting bosses, but there's two kind of bosses that I always kind of focus back on. One, they're both billionaires. Both incredibly wealthy people. So I'm not saying that either of their approaches is right or wrong, but I would say that I was more comfortable with a Dutch guy who basically wanted to get the bad news as quickly as possible, and was kind of he was really about the relationship and about how he connected with his people. The other boss, very famous television personality, incredibly famous, and I couldn't possibly mention his name here because everyone listening would immediately know who he was. But that individual was the complete opposite of that. So he was the last to hear the bad news because people were terrified of him because he didn't have a relationship with those individuals. He treated people as his servants. They were out to kind of look after his life. So I think there's a big piece around we're in it together, we're one team. Alignment, direction is really important, and it's that whole piece around purpose is a very interesting debate.
Absolutely. Now, Emmanuel, coming back onto you at Ennismore, and specifically looking at Generation Z, or iGen, as kind of they're mostly known. Some journalists have called this kind of like a ticking time bomb in terms of mental health, and in terms of specifically that generation that have grown up with technology so systemically in their lives. How do you treat the mental health thing at work, and what kind of approaches are you taking to engage that iGen within Ennismore?
Look, you said right. I think this generation tend to compare themselves constantly, and the social media is offered them a platform and any sort of comparison. It might be career, it might be the way we look, the way we think, and any sort of belief that you have. And we try to keep a very balanced working schedule at the very first thing, because this has been flagged a million of times, where people say, look, I want to enjoy my life, but then they end up still asking for more, and they end up still, it seems like the work, it's doesn't fulfill people. For the same principle, they tend to compare themselves, the way they are doing the career, they do the right thing, they keep on questioning what they do, which of course they tend to lead on a sort of underlying unhappiness, I would say. We tend to, again, talk a lot with people, keep them engaging, give them tools, and also think out of the box, not just stay in a working environment and do coaching related to work, but also take the team out, coaching them on a different topic. I recently launched one activity within one of the restaurants that we manage at Katsuya. I had a book called The Motivation Myth. And I say, look, this has been one of the book that, because everybody come at me and say, how you stay motivated? How you stay motivated? Sometimes it's not about the motivation. It's a small victory that you get on a daily basis and they keep you going, you give it the full to go. So I start this, and I give a book for one, and then, end up going around the whole team, and it's about 15 signatures on the book. And they just keep people in a way a little more grounded, because that's what it's all about, that's what the sort of activity we tend to do. And also, we do event outside the workplace, and, we show the people that it's a different world. It's not just social media. It's about face-to-face. It's interaction with actual human, to go out and enjoy, and having a sort of routine. I think now it seems like we become those big people, at least my generation. I feel I have a big responsibility, to keep on coaching those guys and say, look, it's important that your first hour, forget about social media, spend an hour out, half an hour, go for a run, go for a walk, go for do an activity, make sure that your physiology is there, make sure that you capture the right information, read if you want, or read, sing if you want, but it's important that I think now we need to dedicate a lot of this mental health, which is one of the backfire effects of social media that affecting, of course, the workplace at the end.
Very good answer. Thank you. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Stuart, coming on to you, and with retirement villages, and I asked this question specifically because there's an aging population in the UK. We've seen a massive amount of growth within retirement villages, senior living, that kind of side of things. How do we get people to see this as a career and as an industry where people can actually progress and have that as something that they would want to kind of come and work in? Because I'm right in saying historically it has been difficult to attract top caliber candidates into the sector. Am I right?
It's a real challenge. I mean, we have a very peculiar culture in the UK. You go to anywhere on the continent and you see older people working in restaurants, older people working in hospitality, because it's seen as a career. It's seen as a meaningful career through which people can progress. As yet, we haven't embraced that in the UK. And I don't know whether it's because we don't have the correct training around it, because we don't have the correct career path through that. I'm quite lucky. I work in Victoria, so I work very closely nearby to Westminster College, where great chefs are made, great front of house, great people are made. But their turnover of people, graduates, is very, very low, and we're putting them into the great unknown. So until we can show, actually, you don't have to follow the same path, and it's a comment that keeps coming up. You don't have to follow a straight line. You can veer around. You can change your path. You can follow your dreams, and I think that's the important part. If you're starting off here in retirement living, well, why not move into build to rent? Why not move into co-living? Co-working spaces. It's still where people come to inhabit. It's still where people want to make relationships. And that's a word we haven't used yet, really. It's about those relationships that are formed in the workplace between the different generations, but also with your customer and your clients. And I think that's where we have to be better as an industry, and actually saying, this is a very good basing, but actually the movement you can make for your career and where you want to take that career are endless. You can go into hospitality, you go into pub management, you go into hotel management, you can go into build to rent. I think that's what we haven't yet communicated or embraced as fully as we should have done. It's our failing as managers and as business operators.
Thank you very much for that, Stuart. Makes perfect sense. Andrew, coming on to you with the Middle East, with Etihad, I mean, I guess it's a stereotype about the Middle East that there aren't that many people of the kind of baby boomer generation left in the Middle East, in terms of what people tend to move back to their countries and all that side of things. Am I right in saying that? Am I wrong in saying that? Do you get a lot of Generation Xers who are kind of still in the Middle East, and how would you engage them in a different way than how you would engage Generation Z?
I think I think there's actually a lot of Generation X actually in the region, because I think traditionally the region looks for to hire in expertise, and there's a huge sort of push around nationalisation, emiratization, Saudization, Kuwaitization, Omanization. All these kind of like all the brilliant sort of Middle Eastern countries are really pushing. GCC is really pushing that agenda, and that the best way of educating and supporting those individuals is through mentors, shadowing. Multiple times in my career, in multiple organizations in the region, I've acted as a shadow for individuals, or they've acted as shadows for me. I think that's where you really learn. I think sometimes putting people into, using that incredible depth of knowledge, that wealth of knowledge for those particular, the more I'm in that generation, so using my expertise and being able to pass it on to younger generations, I think is really important. So I think there's still a huge opportunity here for that. What we definitely have found, and I think one of the big challenges in the region is, and I talk a lot about kind of work parents and work grandparents, I think there's a big challenge there sometimes. I don't know about you, Christian. Me personally, I learned from my work grandparents or my work parents. My sort of boss. So I kind of aspire to be like them or not like them, depending on their behaviours and kind of what I thought they were or were not doing. So I think because sometimes there are, there's a lot of people coming into the workforce for the first time, particularly I work a lot in Saudi Arabia. I work a lot in, obviously Qatar, and the younger generation who don't really have those kind of what I would call work grandparents. So they're the sort of first generation actually coming into full-time employment, particularly in service type roles like Starbucks. So there's some challenges there. So they don't have obvious work grandparents or work parents to sort of imitate. So they're the pioneers for me. They're the trailblazers. But they also face the challenges. Their physical parents or grandparents are probably a bit more negative about them going to work, because obviously there's a whole piece around change. So their traditional kind of parents or grandparents might have been more reliant on state to support them, or perhaps personal wealth to support them. So now there's a slight sort of shift in the dynamic. I think Generation X is still required, but it's shifting. Anyone who comes into this region has to come in. I think sometimes people think, it's an easy ride coming working in the region. It's really not that easy. It's much you have to be an absolute expert in what you're doing. That's just and if you're not, you get, it's a very, very short road when you're working here, because the Middle Eastern region does tend to pay premium for people like me, for Generation X, but then they're paying premium because they want to get that experience, and they want you to be able to pass that experience on to their next generation of their sort of nationals. So I think there's still great opportunity here. We're going to get generation, the sixth generation coming in soon, and it amazes me. I think I've got about 2 years left, Christian, and I think I'll be going into a more consultative type of role. But it's very, very fascinating how it's kind of like playing out in front of my eyes. And I think the other thing that's worth mentioning here is just that piece around this rampant AI coming into the market as well, which I think is quite. I wouldn't call it alarming, but I would call it definitely something to be concerned about. I think we all need to be very concerned about that. And I'm not talking about my generation. I think it's probably a bit, we just accepting that's what's going to happen. It's the generation, the sixth generation joining the workforce, whether they'll actually be in a lot of the jobs. I was actually sharing the stage with the head of learning for Amazon in the US. We were in Johannesburg a few months ago. And it was amazing, because he was saying that, pretty much they did a lot of research on this. AWS did a lot of research on this. And they were saying that 80% of jobs that existed when I started in my career in about 1985, dinosaurs still roaming the earth. But 80+% of those jobs physically don't exist today. So they were predicting that pretty much, 80% of the jobs that we're doing right now in this moment probably wouldn't exist within about 20 years. So that's a bit scary, maybe even faster than that. So there's a lot of people out there who probably need to be thinking about reskilling very quickly. And the skills they really need, it's the EQ, it's the empathy, it's the power skills, it's the listening, it's the questions. Those are the kind of skills I think are premium. The technical skills, they're probably going to become less in demand because AI is going to take over. One of the things that upsets me the most as a head of learning for a big organization, and it's when people come to me. I was at a CIPD board meeting this morning, and we were laughing. It's a couple of the challenges we have are either around visas for people to live in the region, or my kind of pet peeve really is leaders coming to me saying, "Can you help people with their pivot tables or create an Excel spreadsheet?" And it's like, no, that I can help them with reading data. And I could help them analysing the data and actually doing some, research and development of data. But I think we're wasting our money investing in Excel training. If they want to do Excel training, go and do a YouTube video, go and watch a LinkedIn video, and they can learn to do a pivot table quick like that. So there's a big shift, and I think definitely the younger generations coming in, my children, Generation Z, millennials, need to be very kind of aware of that.
Absolutely. Stuart, Emmanuel, just to give you fair warning, I am going to come to you with an AI question next because I really enjoyed that answer from Andrew. Andrew, I'm going to stick with you just on one quick soundbite topic that I would like to pick up on. Core Recruitment as an agency, we have been working in the Middle East for a number of years, and we've never had so many requests for diverse candidates as we have right now. Now, traditionally, this has been around female diversity or gender diversity in terms of wanting to up the numbers of females in senior management positions. But I'm very pleased to say that we've just placed our first LGBT VP who's gone into Dubai, and that organization, which is a large global company, are actually changing a lot of their policies and procedures to allow that individual to come with his husband and his 2 kids and get benefits in Dubai as well. Now, this was something which would have been completely unheard of even 3 years ago in Dubai, or I certainly hadn't heard of it in Dubai 3 years ago, especially in terms of individuals being able to be out at work and all that side of things. But how much is the Middle East changing? And do you think this is something which is going to be mirrored across different organizations? Or do you think this is kind of like a bit of an isolated case?
I've been here a long time. I have my brother is gay, married to Stuart and Luke. They've been married for a few years now, and so I'm. It's very interesting. So I suppose I think changes is the thing here. I know that when my brother first came out and sort of declared that he was gay, I was pretty cool with that, I suppose. But definitely my parents kind of freaked about the whole thing. It took a long time for that kind of ship to settle, and that was with their own son sort of declaring that. So they had a kind of quite a traditional British, middle class British people, pretty open-minded. And both my parents were hairdressers, so they're probably more familiar. I'm not trying to stereotype anyone here, but I think my dad was definitely in touch with his feminine side. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that was quite a challenge for him, and definitely for my mother, the idea that my brother was coming out as gay. So that was a fascinating one. I think here they've still got a way to go. It depends. The word that we like to use here is tolerant, and I think I would put it in the same kind of category as what religion you follow. The tolerant has an interesting. There's lots of ways of looking at the word tolerant. For me, it's almost like a lose-lose. But I'm kind of conscious of what I'm saying here. But we have to be very mindful that there is a lot more tolerance here. So we now have a lot more. I mean, if I go to the Louvre, for example, on in Abu Dhabi, it's just in Saudi Island down the road from me. There's lots of kind of Jewish artifacts there. Which a couple of years we fly to Israel now. So a couple of years ago, that just would not have happened. That would never have happened. So there's a general shift in that. I think also the region just understands that the world is kind of shifting. We've recently moved to a more traditional weekend, which is very interesting. So we now work on we're off on a Saturday and Sunday. And for me, it was even hard for me. But for people who have been traditionally been off on a Friday, Saturday for 2 millennia, for them shifting into a slightly different weekend pattern is hard. So I think there is some change. I think change is depends on the individual, and the pace that they're moving through that change depends on who they are. Definitely change depends on their culture, their background, what they believe to be right or wrong. A lot of the generation sort of Z, millennials, have been educated in the US, they've been educated in London, they've been educated in Berlin, they've been educated in Paris. So when they, of course, come back, they've obviously experienced a more tolerant society around them, and therefore they're bringing those tolerances back into their home sort of nations, which I think is important as well. So I think there's a way to go. Good on that organisation for being so being so tolerant. There is definitely there's definitely a like I suppose there's a right wing kind of fraction in I've worked in Russia and we worked in the UK obviously, and there's still going to be individuals who don't think it's the right thing. So I think it's just that it will slowly sort of permeate through the region. Yeah, hopefully that gives you a basic answer to the question.
Absolutely, Manuel. Coming on to you, and specifically regarding the LGBT or the diversity policy in place at Ennismore at the moment, can you give us a little bit about that and how it's evolved over the past couple of years?
Also, maybe in the Middle East, I think we saw a shift of perspective into this. We welcome pretty much everybody without taking any side. That's we're pretty much in the middle, because that's the way you need to be, because you need to consider many factors. Our company is originally based in Paris, which they have a different approach. A lot of hotel in America, a lot of hotel in Europe, Middle East. One of the biggest development now at the moment between Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Saudi coming up. Very big flagship of hotel, and I think the company is taking pretty much a neutral position into this. Again, welcoming everybody. For us, at the end of the day, we always say that we hide personality, and then we welcome pretty much all the personality, even though again they might be not aligned with the many political direction of the country might be in, but at the same time, I think when it comes down to workforce, one of our hotel that is in our brand 25 hours is they come as you are. So that's pretty much says everything.
Excellent, Manuel. Thank you very much for that. Stuart, question for you regarding Gen Z, or specifically on the new kind of like AI trend, which is kind of hitting every organization at the moment. Can you tell us what we can expect to see in the next 5 years from AI?
Well, I'm gonna come at it a slightly different way. I'm hopeful that Japan's going to help us. Japan in the retirement sector is really suffering. Their demographic is aging rapidly. There's no one left to care for their elderly if we're not careful. And I think we're in a similar situation over here. We've got over 40,000 voids and vacancies in the care sector, the social care sector. I'm hopeful that in the next 5 years, we'll start to see care bots being introduced in Japan. So for the physical tasks, they can be carried out by these robots. However, when we're talking, with all the panelists and I have been talking about engagement, learning, community relationships, I think there's a sector around what AI can do around that, and that's going to be for the more mundane tasks. It's going to be for the accountancy, it's going to be for checking in, it's going to be checking out, it's going to be all things like that. But ultimately, our businesses, the business of people, are going to still be driven by people and still driven by relationships, engagement, and that sense of humanity. So I think the care bots are going to help with the physical aspect, but I think social networking, even amongst retirees, social networking will still be the most important thing of living in a community together.
Excellent. I'm going to work around the group now just in terms of like a bit of a recap for anything that you didn't manage to get into the specific questions that I kind of asked you. So Andrew, I'm going to start with you as you kicked us off kind of like, initially, which is great. So in terms of like, advice that you would give to companies, organizations who are looking to communicate effectively across their whole workforce, what hints, tips, suggestions would you give? And specifically, if there's any kind of type of technology that you would recommend that they use?
Yeah, so I always go, there's five. I'm a big fan of using my hands. So there's kind of five things that I would say to people. And it's, the first one is real kind of clarity for people. That's number one for me, 100%. I was very, very curious listening to some of the other guests you've got, just particularly around that whole piece around purpose. I think clarity is very, very, very important. To make people understand the contribution they're making. I hate this the expression. I often ask people what they do, and they tend to use what I call my juster response. So they say, I'm just a pilot, I'm just a cabin crew, I'm just a guest service agent, I'm just a barista. That upsets me. That genuinely upsets me. So I kind of challenge them. I say, well, actually, this organization, doesn't matter if it's Starbucks or H&M or Harvey Nichols or P&O, whatever you're doing in the organization, doesn't happen without you. So you're not a juster. So I think a big part of our job is helping people understand how they fit within the organization. So giving them that clarity is important. With that clarity, of course, it becomes much easier for us to give them feedback. So my second point would be really kind of start working on that interaction, that honesty, that clarity between individuals within organizations. I've mentioned it before. Huge. One of my favorite stories is I was out for lunch a few weeks ago with the architects from what was then called Burj Dubai. Of course, your listeners and people here will be more familiar with the terminology Burj Khalifa, which is now called. I won't go into the history of that. But when in 2004, when they were sort of laying the foundation stones for Burj Dubai, as it was then, the architects were telling a beautiful story where they'd been walking around the perimeter of this new building site, and obviously to protect people falling into what was going to be an enormous hole, there were lots of very enthusiastic people building a fence, and they were asking these individuals what they were doing, and of course they were very, very disappointed because the individuals were telling them repeatedly that they were building a fence and they had no real purpose or why they would try to do this. And there was eventually a very amazing guy called Mahmoud who sort of came over and said, sir, I'm not building a fence. And they said, well, what are you doing, Mahmoud? And he said, I'm building the tallest building in the world. And I think the point here is that Mahmoud understood what he was doing. Yes, he was building a fence, but it was actually there was a bigger purpose. And I think our job is as leaders is helping people understand how their contribution makes such a massive difference. The biggest question I get asked, and I had the head of LinkedIn in my office a few weeks ago. I was chatting to some very senior leaders from LinkedIn earlier, a few minutes ago actually, and again, it's career development. You have to be able to kind of help people understand how a career kind of plots together. And we could talk for hours on this, and I won't bore you, but be really mindful of that. And then just back to my kind of favorite topic really is just care. Number 5 is really, really care about your people. Keep it human, build the relationships. I know we've heard that repeatedly in these sessions, but again, relationship, being really careful and really kind. We use there's a platform called Autonomy, which obviously maximizes all of our learning sort of micro videos, and it then puts them into, I'm very, very kind of animated with my hands, so please forgive me for that. But it just kind of builds learning content out, and it measures knowledge retention and knowledge application as well, which is great. So it asks, so when you watch a 60 seconds or like a bit of Stotts, then it will basically immediately ask you what Stotts was saying, and it'll give you a quick quiz on it, which is AI generated, but it'll also ask you what we call a secondary question. And the secondary question or supplementary question, immediately after you answer each of the multiple choice questions, is it asks and tests your confidence level in the correctness of answering those questions. That for me is really fascinating because it gives us some critical data around the learner retention and how people are kind of growing their careers with us. So, for example, they may be answering the question correctly, and of course they are high confidence in the answer. So they're saying, I think it's answer A. I'm highly confident it's answer A. We love those people, move them on faster through their learning. There's 2 other groups of people that concern us. The first group are people who are getting the right answer. So it's A, but they're saying that they're low confidence in the answer. So we've probably done something wrong with those individuals. What do we need to do to build their confidence in that process? And that's really important. Of course, the area that really concerns me and us as an organization is people who are basically, they're saying it's answer B, And of course, they're saying they're high confidence, let's be. So they've got the wrong answer and they're saying they're high confident, because some people are quite good at blagging it. That's a technical term, I know. So we need to be really kind of mindful of those individuals. And what we're able to do then with that data is say, we actually know that Andrew is blagging it. Let's take him offline. Let's kind of work out why he's doing that. He's perhaps overconfident in that, and therefore we can help him understand, perhaps he's not quite right. So actually having individuals in groups at a certain kind of learning level. So there's some great use of AI and technology available to us now as educators. And I think that's really, really helpful. Not a very succinct answer, but hopefully that gave you a bit of an insight.
Phenomenal, Andrew. Thank you very much for being with us. I really appreciate it. I think I've written down about 5 different keywords that I'm taking away just from your chat today. So thank you.
Very generous.
Emmanuel, thank you very much for being with us today. We just are summing up at the moment. So in terms of advice that you would give from Ennismore to other organisations who are looking at engaging properly with people at all levels and all cultures within their organisations, what would you recommend? And specifically, is there any technology that you would recommend that they harness?
Yeah, I think I need to agree with Andrew, which at the end, the human value will still be things that I want to keep on growing, make sure that soft skills, that they're always there. Artificial intelligence has come to us extremely fast, and people, I think, they get very confused and scared in a specific way. But I think they are powerful tools. When you apply day to day, they can really, make a big change. But the human touch will never be replaced, especially in my industry as hospitality. I'm not saying that, one day we might not see a robot working around a restaurant in a lobby of a hotel, that's for sure. But, the flair of a person would be always the most welcome around, They say that 3 of the most attractive quality of a person is self-awareness, self-confidence and vulnerability, because again, these are things that you can't really replace. I think people should still focus on themselves, understand who they are, and make sure that they show themselves the true color of the way they are. And then there is tools that they can, empower themselves with. That's it. That's pretty much my suggestion.
Brilliant, Emmanuel. Thank you very much for that. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. Today's topic is talking about communicating with people at all levels of organisations, specifically when it comes to demographic in terms of age. Stuart, can you give us a little bit of an overview in terms of the communication tools that you guys use, and specifically any technology that you'd recommend that companies adopt?
I think technology has to become secondary to really the key point. And I think this is about understanding. I think you have to understand your audience that you're dealing with, but also understand your colleagues. You've asked questions today, and I'm sure people will be able to see this, about language, about technology, about other things. And really, in a way, the different age groups between millennials and Gen Zs and what have you are immaterial. It's all about understanding. It's all about understanding what people want from their career. It's understanding how you can best help them, how you can best listen to them, how you can best educate them and help them learn and become a better person in your culture and inside your company. We do it to our customers. We're constantly surveying our customers. We're constantly finding out what their net promoter score is. We don't do it often enough for the people that work for us. We don't try and understand them. We don't try and talk to them in their language. We come up with corporate value. So I think that the technology is simply a method of media, if you will, as if you're talking to your customer. And if you're selling a new beverage, then you're going to a supermarket or you're going to the high street and get people sampling it. If you're selling something else, you'll try a different way. So I think technology is simply a conduit to enable people to differentiate themselves regardless of their age, and just really, as a manager, as a C-level or even the lowest person in your business, that customer focused, both internal and external, is of paramount importance. Sorry, I didn't really answer your question there, but I hope it was something you were looking for.
No, I think that was succinct. I think that was very good. Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you so much for joining today. If you're in the attendees, thank you so much for watching. Next 10 comments are always good and would be much appreciated. And we'll go from there. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Love you guys. Take care. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you so much. Bye.